Hello, and welcome to 2-Minute Talk Tips. I'm Bill Monroe. This week's tip, don't trust the internet. And I'm not just talking about political commentary here. In a previous life, I ran a team that demonstrated Wi-Fi projectors and wireless tablets at events. We could set up a great demo before the show opened, have backup gear, and test everything. But as soon as the show opened, everything stopped working, and we would have to fall back to plan B. As soon as people were on the convention floor with their laptops and their cell phones, and all those water-filled, Wi-Fi blocking human bodies, the network would just go down. Speakers like to use the internet while speaking for a variety of reasons, such as including YouTube videos and presentations, demonstrating software that may be browser-based, or showing social media feeds. But the problem is you can't trust that the internet will always work while you're speaking. Meetings in hotel conference rooms may or may not have reliable Wi-Fi, especially if those rooms happen to be at a lower level of the hotel. Attendees may also suck up all available bandwidth with their own wireless devices. The point is that when the actual show begins and your audience is in the room, you can't assume the Wi-Fi or the internet will actually work. And buffering can certainly kill the momentum in your presentation, just as a slow or unreliable connection can crash the software you're demonstrating. Look, we'd like to assume the internet is always there, but we just can't trust that it will be. If that video is going to be critical to the success of your presentation, have it on your hard drive instead of on the internet. If your web-based software is a critical part of your presentation, have a backup collection of screen captures of what it would look like if it was live. A live internet connection can be great, but if it fails at the last minute, you don't want to deal with that last-minute scramble to try and get it fixed. Assume it won't work and have a backup ready to go. Stick around, and after the break, I want to talk a little bit about ghost stories. Welcome back. And if you're listening to this episode on the day it came out, happy Halloween. Storytelling is one of my favorite topics, as you can probably tell. I talk about it a lot. So for Halloween this year, let's talk about ghost stories and how telling them can make us better speakers. For much of human history, cultures around the world have passed on their history, rules, traditions, and myths in stories rather than in slides and books. It's how humans shared lessons and built communities in the millennia before widespread literacy. Scary stories alongside regular stories have a long history. From epic tales that are now centuries old and required reading for college classes to campfire stories about deranged killers who traded a hook for a hand, scary stories bring us together as communities of friends. They teach us to follow social rules, and they teach us to be afraid of the dark. Ghost stories are tough to tell well, but when we hear an excellent one, it stays with us and invades our dreams. How often do our regular business presentations have that kind of impact? While a quarterly sales presentation or a motivational keynote may never be the same as a ghost story told around a campfire with s'mores and hot chocolate, there are still lessons that speakers can learn from ghost stories. Here are 7 of them. 1. Setting matters. 2. Community matters. 3. Pacing matters. 4. Volume matters. 5. The unexpected matters. 6. Practice matters. And 7. Slides do not matter. So let's take a deeper look at those 7 items, and then I'll tell my own true ghost story. First of all, setting matters. Most ghost stories need a quiet space. It should be dark, and preferably late at night. Ideally, there should be a twinge of danger about the environment, like around a campfire in the woods. Or maybe it's in a car driving down a lonely highway. If it's a little chilly so flirty partners can snuggle up together for comfort and warmth, well, that's even better. When it's time for your departmental strategy briefing, that's exactly the environment you don't want. You want a bright room that's only dim enough to make your slides visible, comfortable chairs, and a clean, safe environment with no cuddling. The environment where you tell your story influences how your audience experiences it. And that's why it's so important for you to go ahead and understand the setting that you're telling your story in. Whether you're going to tell a ghost story in a creepy environment or out around the woods, or whether you're going to share your latest sales projections in front of your boss. And if you don't believe me, try swapping those two story environments I just told you about. You'll see that setting matters. Second, community matters. Ghost stories involve a community or a group and are part of a bigger, shared communal experience. Knowing how people are likely to respond and how much shared cultural language they have changes the way you tell a ghost story. In ghost stories, more than in traditional anecdotes, the storyteller is focused on that audience reaction. When presenting at work, the community also matters. That's why we talk so much about audience analysis and understanding who your audience is. There's a shared context around the state of the business or around the language and jargon that colleagues use. So before presenting to a professional audience, understand their concerns and their priorities. Are there hot-button issues you need to know about or avoid? Is your language appropriate? Will they understand your references, abbreviations, and other jargon? Find out ahead of time because that community matters. Third, pacing matters. A good ghost story relies heavily on mood. The teller doesn't plow through it as quickly as possible. A proper ghost story will often use a slow, deliberate pace. The storyteller relies on pauses, silence, rhythmic speaking, and occasional rapid bursts when the action needs to move along. In a standard professional presentation, pacing also matters. The speaker will generally speak more quickly than the storyteller in a ghost story, but they can still rely on silence to make a point, or pacing to rev up a presentation. It can help to speed up to keep an audience's attention from wandering and then suddenly slow down to help land a point. For engaging an audience and landing a point, pacing matters. Fourth, volume matters. Much like pacing, the vocal variety and dynamic speaking volume can engage a crowd. In a ghost story, the storyteller may speak in a hushed tone to encourage the audience to lean in and to build tension, and then get loud just as something jumps out to surprise the audience. In a professional presentation, volume is also important, and while it can be used to build suspense, the most important volume consideration is usually just being loud enough to make sure everyone can hear. But dynamic volume can also be used to land a point by being loud or suddenly speaking more softly and conspiratorially to tell the whole room a secret. Because volume matters. Fifth, the unexpected matters. A good ghost story involves a mystery, whether that mystery involves what happens next, or what's going on, or how the situation will resolve itself. The mystery and the unexpected gives the story its power. A good scare is often the cathartic output of the story, and that depends on the unexpected. A successful professional presentation also relies on the unexpected. Not that we want our attendees jumping out of their seats, usually, but we often do want our audience to leave with something new, something they didn't know when they came in. Maybe that's new facts or a new outlook, a new perspective on their role or on life, or a new goal for their work. When you give them something they did not expect, they feel they got even more value from you, because the unexpected matters. Sixth, practice matters. Telling a ghost story isn't like rattling off an anecdote about a recent trip to Starbucks. To have the best impact, you need to practice the story and tell it again and again. Pacing, volume, and the right content are deliberate choices the storyteller makes, and getting all of them right isn't automatic. You'll do much better the 10th time you tell the story than the first time you tell it. The more important your professional presentation, the more important it is to practice it. When you practice, you ensure that your content makes sense, that it flows well, and that the words smoothly roll off your tongue. More importantly, you make sure that you will finish on time. The best presenters out there rehearse, and then they rehearse again. I've worked with executives who rehearse keynotes for hours, and when you consider how much a chief executive earns per hour, the investment in labor to rehearse a presentation is substantial and worth it, because practice matters. So let's mix things up a little bit for this last point. Seventh, slides do not matter. I have never seen a ghost story made better by PowerPoint slides, though that does give me a good idea for a skit. A ghost story doesn't need slides to move the audience. And in a professional presentation, don't automatically assume that you need slides. Any slides that you do use should support you as a speaker, not the other way around. And if you do use slides, when you tell a story, consider blanking your screen by pressing the B or W key in PowerPoint, because ultimately, like in a ghost story, your slides don't matter. Your story does. So let's wrap things up with a story that actually happened to me. When it comes to ghosts and other supernatural critters, I'm skeptically open-minded. By that, I mean I acknowledge the possibility that souls of the departed sometimes wander yet on this side of the veil, but it's unlikely I'll believe any particular ghost story, except my grandmother's, and more importantly, my own. When I was a sophomore in college, about 25 years ago, I took the job of yearbook editor. I learned a lot on that job, namely that I wasn't cut out to be a yearbook editor yet. But I took the job, had deadlines to meet, and no matter how much I didn't want to do it, I made the commitment and I was going to live up to it. The yearbook office at Carroll College was in St. Albert's Hall, a small building that was maybe 100 feet or so away from my main dorm. St. Al's was also the campus student activity center at that point. The first floor had lounge space with a full kitchen, and the second floor had a long, narrow hallway, and lining it were small, narrow, coffin-like offices. It wasn't a lot of room, but it was enough. Decades earlier, St. Al's was home to the nuns who used to work at the college. Now, like any good Catholic college campus, it was filled with stories of the religious who used to live there. Stories passed from student to student had it that one of the nuns who had actually lived in St. Al's had hung herself in the room. Of course, every Catholic campus has those iconic stories. And did it actually happen? I have no idea. But what I do know is that if it did, I nearly met her. Late one night, at about 3 a.m., I was working on a bunch of layouts. I was alone in the building. The front door was locked. I sat in the upstairs yearbook office along that long hallway with my door open and the radio playing. Step, 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 step. I heard someone walking down the hallway from the far end. So I got up from my chair and I peeked my head outside. I was sure it's probably the night security guard just checking on things. But no one was there. So I shrugged my shoulders, figuring it was nothing, and returned to work. I turned off the radio in case that's what I heard. I pulled out a fresh sheet of layout paper and my T-square. Step, 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 step. This time the steps were closer. They came from the middle of the hall instead of the end. Hello? I called out, and no one responded. I got up, looked up and down the hall, and I saw no one. So I stepped out of the office and took a quick look around downstairs. No one. Well, by now I was getting a little nervous. I could sense the goosebumps just below my surface of my skin waiting to pop out. But I was still alone, and there was still work to be done. So I sat down at the desk and tried to focus. Step, step. Definitely closer now. Definitely not some animal or rodent in the building. And when I looked out, there was still no one in the hall. I sat at the desk and began collecting my things. I figured I should probably go to bed soon since I was having trouble focusing, what with the phantom walker in the hall. Step, 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 step. The mystery walker slowly walked right past my door. I had no doubt those were footsteps, but they still came from nothing. Now, officially scared and making the sign of the cross, I grabbed my stuff and I got the heck out of there. I barely remember shutting off the lights, and I don't remember walking to my dorm. I just have flashes of the lobby in my memory. The next thing I knew, I was back in my dorm room. My racing heart started to fall back below 500 beats per minute. And that's how the story ends. I think. I haven't encountered my mystery strolling nun since then, and I hope it stays that way. But for whatever reason, that one night, she decided to check up on me. It would be a few weeks before I spent another really late night in that building, and I hope she got to whatever destination she was walking to. I do know that now I'll live only with carpeted hallways, and that I'll try to sleep through any future ambulating habit-wearing spirits. So, that's it for this week. When you build your next presentation, think about the 7 things you can learn from ghost stories. 1. Setting matters. 2. Community matters. 3. Pacing matters. 4. Volume matters. 5. The unexpected matters. 6. Practice matters. 7. Slides do not matter. Don't always assume the internet will work. And be sure to share this episode with a friend or colleague and encourage them to subscribe to 2-Minute Talk Tips. So, sleep tight if you can, and don't get best. Get better.